Hi, my name is Amber Stoutenborough, and I am the Multimedia Managing Editor for the DePaulia, as well as the host of the DePaulia's podcast, Page 29. The DePaulia is a student-run newspaper that prints 28 pages each week, covering Chicago news as well as everything else about DePaul University. This is Page 29. Today I have Una Cleary, our focus editor for the DePaulia today. Hi, Una.
Hi, Amber.
She wrote an article about the Women's Mayoral Forum. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so I wrote this story with Jackie Cardenas, and it was a forum with 8 out of the 9 candidates running for mayor. It was at the Chicago Temple yesterday, Saturday. There was 2 moderators that were there to ask the candidates questions. The questions were specifically about reproductive rights, education in Chicago, homelessness, and a couple other issues that they discussed. And we were able to interview some of the candidates such as Jamal Green, Sophia King, and Paul Vallis. So yeah, it was super interesting to see them as well as to interview some voters on what they thought of the forum and what they think of the candidates so far and how they feel about the race.
So I know for Lori Lightfoot, it's not really a happy feeling so far with how most people think of her. What did you see at the forum?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. There was a lot of candidates who were calling her out on specific issues, as well as a lot of voters that just weren't very happy that she was there, I think. But it was interesting to also meet some voters that were in approval of her. She still does have a bit of a following. I think she has an 11% approval rating right now. But it was definitely a lot of name calling. It was pretty fun to watch, but yeah.
Was there anyone that was there that actually likes Lori Lightfoot?
Yeah, so I was able to interview one woman about her. She wishes to remain anonymous. She was saying that she wasn't expecting to like Lori going in to the forum, that she was actually leaning towards Vallis at the beginning, but hearing her speak kind of changed her opinion. She was saying how she thought she was a very tough woman, and she had to be very tough these past 4 years, and that these past 4 years were very hard. So I think hearing her speak again and hearing her toughness, as the woman said, changed her opinion, which was interesting to hear.
I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Was there anyone that you feel was very loved with the community?
Yeah, I think that Brandon Johnson definitely got a lot of applause, as well as Jamal Green. But it was kind of hard to say because it was a forum setting. So it was kind of just based on who was applauding the candidates and who I interviewed. But I will say that those were 2 candidates that I think kind of stood out to me, especially for younger voters. I think Jamal Green is he's the youngest candidate running for mayor. So I think he's someone that would appeal to younger voters.
And I know they went over a couple of hard topics that are happening with Chicago. I know one of them is definitely public safety and crime. What was one of the topics that you think was the most interesting to hear the candidates talk about?
Yeah, I will say education was really interesting to hear about, and some of the candidates' experience with education, especially someone like Paul Vallis, who's the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools. Hearing some of the candidates call him out for his involvement with the public schools and changing them to charter schools. Brandon Johnson called him out for that, and so I think that was interesting to hear. It was also interesting to hear the candidates' response to abortion rights and reproductive rights. A lot of the male candidates, they would say that their experience was having wives or daughters. They would preface whatever they were going to talk about with, I have a wife and I have a daughter and I love very much, which is great to hear, but it was just interesting how they used that as their first comment in the response to those questions. So, yeah.
So I know you got to actually interview some of the people who are running for mayor, which is pretty exciting. And one of them is Jamal Green, right? How do you feel after talking to him? What was it like?
Yeah, he definitely was someone I think is going to appeal very much to younger voters. He's doing TikToks for his campaign. He's very active on social media. And yeah, he is the youngest candidate to be running. I did really enjoy speaking with him about his stance on education and crime. Something that he said about crime was that he wants to use CPD as kind of a support system, but not like a front runner, and truly trying to invest in communities instead of putting CPD first, which I thought was a little bit different than what I heard with some of the other candidates. But yeah, he grew up in Chicago. He said that he had his family on like the south and west side, and he's always been here. He also talked about how he did sleep under viaducts during the polar vortex with some people who were experiencing homelessness. So that was interesting to hear how they weren't allowing those people to sleep in the police stations when it was that cold. And so that was something that I think really influenced him on his crime approach and his safety plan. So yeah, I think he definitely has a lot of personal experience with that as well.
Well, is there anything else that you think the listeners should know about the mayoral race this year?
Yeah, I think you should definitely, if you can, go to some of these forums. I learned a lot from it. It's really cool to see the candidates in person and to see what they're all about, see them talk, and definitely try to keep up to date with what's happening. It's going to be an interesting election for sure. Early voting will begin February 13th and run through Election Day, February 28th.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Una.
Thank you.
Today I have Lilly Keller, the Arts and Life Editor for the DePaulia, with us today. Hi, Lilly.
Hi, Amber. So good to be here.
This week, Lilly Keller wrote about the pillars underneath the Fullerton stop that Brother Mark Elder painted. Who is Brother Mark Elder?
So he's been a faculty member of DePaul staffs for 28 years now, and he's actually done a number of iconic murals throughout the DePaul campus, which everyone's seen, including the Big Vinny on McCabe Hall, which you can see when you're on the Fullerton platform. But he's definitely been involved with a lot of public art community projects centered on the Vincentian heritage, while also getting members of the community, staff, and students involved, which can also be seen in his most latest creation, The Little School Under the L.
That's really cool. I also didn't know that he did the one on McCabe.
It's really interesting because he also did one in the Vincentian headquarters in Rome. So he's very involved with not just art, but I think the Vincentian heritage too, which I think is really cool, just to be able to do both and leave such a lasting impact.
Obviously, I've never met him before, but I know that he's made a lot of impact on other students. What did they have to say about him?
Yes, so one of the students I interviewed was senior Meg Sampson, and it was actually meeting Brother Mark and learning of the project that made her want to pursue art as a major, because she wanted to get involved with the murals. He was actually not offering the mural class anymore, but she was really enthusiastic about it and reached out to him, and so from then on, she got to be one of the select students involved with it on the side. But then I also talked to other students such as Tavia Ridgway, who was involved with the project since her freshman year. She was one of the main players in helping construct the murals during the school year and over the summer as well. And interestingly, she was the only student who got to design and paint their own pillar. Hers was titled The End of Trails, which commemorates all the names of all the students, staff, just community members who aided in the mural's creation, as well as a homage to herself as a Black woman native to Chicago.
So what exactly is on these pillars?
So on the pillars, it's a mixture of both portraits, but also landscapes and symbols that represent figures from DePaul's history, but also clubs, communities, and organizations that are centric to Chicago, like the CTA. But some of the earlier pillars, they're portraits of figures such as Father McCabe. Elder wanted to feature lesser-known figures. One that I found really interesting was he did a portrait of the first women graduate, which it's interesting. There's actually not a photo of her out there. So,
wow.
Yeah, they did get a little creative with it. But basically, she was teaching at the age of 16 back in 1880, but wanted to further her education and teach higher levels of school, and in 1912 DePaul was the only school that allowed her to get that education as a laywoman.
The fact that he tried to do a mural without a picture of someone is very inspiring, I guess, to say the least. What was it like talking to him? I know there's a lot of other characteristics about him, like he's a real cowboy.
Yes, I was looking on his website to find more information about him, and I found pictures of him on actual horse and in like a rodeo because he always wears his famous cowboy attire. He's really like, claiming the aesthetic, but it's legit. And I think that was also very visible in his personality. He's very charismatic, but also very knowledgeable about DePaul's history as well. He actually told me that people from the library archive started calling him now for information rather than what it started out as being the other way around.
Sorry, what a flex. Like, have the library call you? That's amazing.
Definitely.
Besides seeing the pillars underneath the actual Fullerton train, there is an actual studio as well where the pieces are displayed, right?
Yeah, so in the Richardson Art Gallery, which is right off of the entrance to the library on the Lincoln Park campus, there is an exhibit going on there titled Behind the Pillars, which allows viewers a smaller glimpse of each of the murals on the pillars. They're on 25 canvases around the room, so it allows just a more detailed look into them, and also if you don't normally go by the Fullerton stop, it makes it so you too can witness the art and not just have to take the train to go see it.
That's really, really cool. Did he tell you like what he's doing next? I mean, this was a big project that he's been working on.
So they're not teaching the mural class in the spring, obviously, because there's not a big project on hand. But he told me that I think he's gonna actually like do some aspects like that are based off of this project. But I think it's the same route of DePaul's history and bringing it to DePaul, basically, making it more accessible to understand.
How long is the art museum open for?
So it's currently open now, and it's running until March 9th. But I believe visitation days are on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 5 p.m. But if that doesn't work out for you, Brother Mark said you could just reach out to him to schedule a private tour.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have our sports editor, Tom Gorski, with us, talking about the men's Blue Demons basketball games and how they won this past week. Hi, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I know it was a really big game this past time. 22-game streak, right?
Yes, DePaul finally beat the big bad Villanova squad. Villanova beat them 22 straight games. Stubblefield finally had a really big statement win, and that arguably might be the biggest win of his career so far since he's been here at DePaul.
It's a little disappointing, though, because right after this big game, they played again on Saturday and they lost. Can you talk a little bit about it?
I mean, it's always tough when a team loses, but it's especially, it was kind of something a lot of people saw coming, because in sports, after you have such an emotional win, the very next game, you tend to kind of just drop it. And it's just because there's so many emotions involved. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's just, it happens in football, baseball, basketball. Any emotional win, the very next game, there's a high percentage chance of that team is going to lose. Just because whether they overlook their opponent, they're still coming off of the excitement and emotion from the game before. Yeah, it's just a thing in sports that kind of happens, and it's very unfortunate.
So it was to be expected.
It was to be expected, and Seton Hall is a very tough team. And DePaul, they're having a very solid season. Not great season, solid season. But it was very unlikely for them to beat both Big East conference opponents, because they've struggled with the Big East under Stubblefield before. But more so, two in the same week is very unlikely.
So besides that, what else has been really big that's happening this season so far?
Obviously, I feel like it's with Tony Stubblefield and his coaching staff. I feel like they've adjusted very well with the amount of adversity they've had to face. They lost grad student Nick Ongenda just 2 days before the season. He suffered a wrist injury, was sidelined, and then he was reevaluated 8 weeks later, and they determined that his wrist would require surgery. So he's not expected to be back this season. He has a chance to come back for the Big East tournament, but I feel like they're more than likely just going to redshirt him so he gets another year of eligibility. And then they lost another starter in Caleb Murphy. He had surgery on his wrist as well before this, like probably in the off season. So like weeks before Ongenda's injury happened, and he still has yet to see the court this year. So you're looking about 2 out of the 5 starters are out. And then Nick Ongenda's replacement, Yorane, suffered a foot injury a few games into the season, and he was out for about a month, and he came back for the Christmas Day game against Creighton. So they missed 2 of their centers, which is very important.
So a lot of injuries. This has been an interesting year for them so far, I guess.
That's probably been the biggest takeaway, and why this season's been so fascinating is with just the amount of adversity the team has had to face.
And I know you've written a lot about how it's been mostly a two-player game. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, with the way the roster is constructed, it's been heavy Javen Johnson, who is a transfer from Iowa State. This is his second year with DePaul. He's kind of taken over the Javon Freeman Liberty role, who was DePaul's best player a year ago. Mm-hmm. So he's taken over and really become the team's go-to scoring option. They live or die without him. And then for Emoja Gibson, he's a transfer from a really big school in Oklahoma. And he's a 6th year, such as Johnson, who's a 5th year. So DePaul's really leaning towards the veteran guys. And those two have ultimately been DePaul's go-to guys, game in, game out. Every game you look at the box score, they're the 2 leading scorers. So the team really relies on them.
You said it was Nelson's breakout for this one?
Yes, it was Deshaun Nelson, the junior college transfer. He really had a breakout game coming off the bench. He scored, I believe, 24 points against Villanova off the bench, which was even more impressive. He's played very well this season, but his defense has lacked a little bit, and that's why against Seton Hall, that game was so fascinating, was because he scored 13 first-half points. But he didn't see much playing time in the second half, and they lost. So when I talked to Stubblefield post-game about it, he said his biggest concern was Nelson's lack of playing time in the second half was because he's not rebounding enough or playing well enough on defense. And they lost by just a few points. So it makes you think a little bit. Did Stubblefield maybe kind of like outcoach himself in a way? So yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of up and downs with this team, but I would say outside of the 2 main obvious breakout stars, Deshaun Nelson has looked phenomenal, and he's been a really nice piece because when you look at someone at the college level, a transfer, they come from a D1 school.
Right.
You're coming from junior college. That's nowhere near D1 talent. Right. So the fact that he's been able to make the adjustment and the transition at this level has really been impressive, and just as a writer of the team, it's been really enjoyable to watch.
So looking forward to the rest of the season, what are you expecting from the men's basketball?
Obviously, expectations have not exceeded. They're not where they were a year ago, but when you include all the injuries and the adversity that they've faced, I would say that what people should be looking forward to is that this team's going to play hard. You're not going to see a lot of blowouts. You may see a lot of losses, unfortunately, but you're going to at least see an entertaining team from beginning to finish. They're going to go out there, they're going to fight, but at the end of the day, if you can't level the playing field with certain talents, that because the Big East is such a big conference and it's so talented. DePaul has been just trying to get back to the top for 20 plus years, and it's just a process. So I would say expect the team to really just battle it out. Don't get discouraged by the wins and losses, because this was always a rebuild when Stubblefield was hired from Oregon. So just really enjoy the games, look at the talent, enjoy it, come out to Wintrust, and you're going to see a good product on the court. You're not going to see a team that lacks effort.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
You can read all of these stories and more at thedepauliaonline.com or picking up one of our print newspapers this week. My name is Amber Stoutenborough, and this is Page 29. Thank you so much for listening.